incident, a massacre. That's what they're calling it. Videos online popping up of these teenagers. Five teenagers, hand-bound. Some of them were gagged, severely beaten.
Yes.
And it's hard to kind of describe some of this stuff for people, and I wouldn't recommend they go watch any of this. But they were basically made to kill each other.
Yes.
In a horrible display that is very reminiscent of some of the stuff that was coming out of Syria when the whole Arab situation, spring was going on out there. The expansion of ISIS and some of the controlled territories that the U.S. took over way back when. But now we're seeing it here in Mexico, this horrible situation. In the video, it made it seem like there was a very specific cartel responsible for these things. Can you talk a little bit about this incident?
Sure. So going back a little bit, these are the 5 young men. They were all between the ages of 19 and 22. They were kidnapped in early August, on August 11th. All 5 of them disappeared at the same time. They were at a nearby fair, and then they moved to a little area where they could just overlook the city. All of them were hanging out.
Un mirador.
Yeah. De San Miguel.
Yeah.
And they were never heard from, seen again. The next time that we saw them, they appeared in a video made to kill each other.
Different weapons given to them, rocks, knives, basically for them to kill each other.
So in the video, which I don't recommend anyone to watch, we see that there are 4 bodies laying on the ground, which we presume that the killing had already started. The video pans to someone throwing one of the individuals a rock, forced to bash his friend's head. He's then thrown a knife, forced to behead him. And absolutely, it's something that we see reminiscent of ISIS, but it's also something that we've seen in Mexico with the Zetas. In the San Fernando 2011 massacre, this is exactly what was described from some of the survivors. So, they called it a coliseum,
a gladiatorial thing. Having gone through some government training myself, I know it's very reminiscent of some of the stuff that we were exposed to. Can you put the other image back, the image of the student, of these kids? Now, everybody's seeing all these faces. What do we know about their backgrounds? Because the classic thing in Mexico is to say that they were involved in some some criminal activity, that they had it coming, because that's a classic government and also societal thing. These were all good kids.
Absolutely.
One of them, I think he was like a gold medalist professional cyclist.
2 of them were boxers as well. Their families describe them as really good students, as model young kids who
all of them had employment. All of them had a job. I think. What can you tell us about the elements of them being called for a job, or them looking for a job that was kind of like a part of this case?
So this is also reminiscent of the case that we talked about the last time when I was here, about this call center. These ominous call centers that always pop up in Jalisco. 2 of the young men, we know that they were looking for employment. One of the lines of investigation that the authorities have narrowed down is that they called someone who had a relation to a call center and looking for employment. This is very common in Jalisco, where they get these job offers, very lucrative. They go into them and then they're potentially kidnapped. Some of them turn out to be call centers, which is the very confusing aspect of these stories, where there are legitimate call centers that are operating, but then there are the ones that are hiding in plain sight, using them as recruitment or forced recruitment enterprises. Essentially, they call these young men, lure them into these fake positions of, be a guardia, a security guard outside a club or a mall or whatever, lured into these positions, and they're never seen from again.
We've heard stories of some of these kids going to security jobs and then ending up in a training camp somewhere in the hills, and then being said, hey, you can't leave. You not only can't leave, but you have to perform or else you're dead.
Exactly.
And I mean, what we see in this video is reminiscent of some of that. There was a mention in graffiti depicting the responsibility of this incident. Can you talk a little bit about
Absolutely. So this is also a very interesting part of this case. In the video that was released, there was a writing on the video that said "Puro MZ," which is reminiscent of, in the cartel world, this is often reference to the Mayo Zambada faction of the Cartel de Sinaloa, the Sinaloa cartel.
Yeah.
So immediately upon watching that video, you start making these correlations as to maybe it was a Sinaloa cartel. Upon further investigation, or at least in Lagos and Morenos, everyone that I've spoken to in Lagos and Morenos knows that the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación has the strongest presence there.
There's no way that the Omaya Zambada's people would perform something like that in the middle of this territory, basically.
Everyone that I've spoken to doubts it.
Yeah.
Not only because it's something that we haven't seen, or we have seen less from the Sinaloa cartel, but because of the power that the Jalisco cartel has in Lagos and Morenos. Sinaloa cartel is present in Jalisco, but in other areas. So immediately talking to people, one of the highest hypotheses that they think is that Jalisco cartel is trying to implicate the Sinaloa cartel.
It's almost like a psychological, counterintelligence operation in a lot of ways. It's very reminiscent of military style operations of let's shift blame.
Absolutely. And we see this previously with other cartels as well, when they say calentar la plaza, the heating of the plaza, when you basically implicate a rival cartel, you commit atrocities in their territories or use their name to commit atrocities so that it draws federal forces against your rivals.
And also just public sentiment.
Absolutely.
Which is cartels are shielded by public sentiment, and if you have one cartel being the enemy of the people, which is something you see commonly talked about and said and verbalized in all these propaganda videos, that hey, we're not extortionists, we're not murderers, we're here to clean these people out, and they both say the same thing.
They absolutely, it's a very common cartel propaganda tactic. So at the end of the day, we're just speculating here because there has been no confirmation, no claims of responsibility have been issued by any cartel member or a criminal organization. But this is what we have here, what we hear from locals as well as the authorities, kind of narrowing down some lines of investigations. There's a lot of doubt that
the contacts are New Generation Cartel linked. The areas New Generation Cartel operated, and the fact that they took 5 strong grown men and tied them up means that there's probably an organized, very heavily armed element around this, and all that kind of leads to maybe pointing at organized crime.
Absolutely.
So that's and again, all of them that I've done my research, you research on them, all of them seem to come from a strong family nucleus background. There's a few fathers actually kind of stating that are still looking for them.
One of the fathers has said that he's still tending to the garden every single day, hoping that his son will come back. I mean, when we look at stories like this is something that keeps happening in Mexico over and over again. We're forced to desensitize ourselves because we see this so often, but when you look at the stories behind and the families and the relatives, they're real families that are struggling and fighting this every single day, and
it's almost normalized now.
It's completely normalized. And you mentioned this earlier, that we have almost this stereotype that whenever we see images like this, we automatically assume that they're implicated.
Yeah, what were they into that led to this? They found bodies in this murder scene that were unrelated to this.
Exactly. So several days after they were kidnapped, one of their vehicles was reported basically set ablaze. His Jetta car was found on fire. They found a cadaver inside the vehicle. Had no relation to any of these 5 young men, but the line of investigation stopped. Then the second time, they found in this area where the video was presumed to have been filmed, they found 4 skulls. They found incinerated body parts that, again, had no relation to these young men. But these are also, horror scenes that authorities seem to have stopped investigating. It's very common in Mexico to call it like an open gravesite. Like, we're just constantly finding bodies, but that's where it ends.
Yeah.
We don't know where these bodies came from. We're not pursuing any lines of investigations as to what these areas could be. Are they training facilities for cartel organizations? Are they
the massacre? Yeah, it's the kill floors basically for them.
This is the Mirador. So this is also where they were presumed to have been kidnapped. They found bloodstains, zip ties, just remnants of a horror scene. Just remnants of
hot industrial heavy-duty white zip ties.
Yes.
Blood on the ground, reminiscent of somebody getting hit in the head, was usually with the butt of a gun or stuff like that.
Yes.
This is like, this has all the hallmarks of organized group of armed men basically taking somebody against their will, and the way they were bound up and stuff like that in the video is very reminiscent of a lot of stuff that is related to the new generation cartel.
And what is unfortunate about situations like this that we keep talking about again is that, we're here yet again talking about another massacre. Do we know whether it's going to be solved? Probably not.
Probably not.
And what I worry about, or I think we're constantly worrying about, is that the next time we're going to be talking about a new massacre and a new one and a new one that is becoming very common in Mexico.
The new normal. Again, all of these kids had dreams, plans. I think one of them was writing a book. Something about him writing a book. His dad said he's going to continue it. Their rooms are still being kept by their mothers. They all had plans. Again, athletes, people that working on their bodies, people looking towards the future.
Yes.
Mexico doesn't have a lot of opportunities for the young. And
we don't.
And some of them go into the desperation and go into this line of work, but these kids were not in that. Were not on that path. The scary part of it for me is that people are not falling into it now; they're being forced into it, which is a new nightmare for people. It's not like, hey, I hope my son doesn't make the mistake of associating with these people or glorifying these cartels. No, your sons are going to be taken and made to serve.
Absolutely.
That is a whole new horror.
And this is another myth that we have within the cartel world, that, these promises of a lucrative, luxurious lifestyle are vanishing. From what I see, the youth is that this idea of the cartel is also changing. It's very, everyone knows it's a very dangerous life.
Improvised explosives and IEDs have been done in Mexico before. Landmines are fairly recent new phenomenon in Mexico, something that has a long history outside in different war fields out there in the world, reminiscent of some of the stuff, again, Middle Eastern conflicts. Tlajomulco, there was a landmine attack.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about this?
Yes, this happened in Jalisco in early July, and we have seen it before. We've seen it with the Carteles Unidos versus the Jalisco cartel in Michoacan. This happened. What's interesting about this case is that it happened in Jalisco and the way that it happened. So there were police that were basically lured into this site on an anonymous call that there was a clandestine grave. The police basically pursued that anonymous tip. They go there and landmines explode.
That tip was given to them by...
So the call was alleged to have been by the Madres Buscadoras, one member of the Madres Buscadoras, which is a very common volunteer group across the states, but in Jalisco, they're volunteers of relatives searching for bodies. So
they organize these groups of mothers basically and family members, and they go to fields and just try and find
they scour deserts. They're basically looking for distressed terrain, signs of crematoriums in search for their missing relatives. And oftentimes they'll get support by the Fiscalia, by the authorities, and many times they don't. In this particular case, the police alleged that the call came from one of the women.
One of these women.
Immediately, the women came out and said, "This was not us. We don't do searches at night because of the high security risk." So,
they were lured out there.
They were lured out. And a few, 3 police officers were killed and 3 civilians were killed as well. There were about 12 or 14 injuries from these. There were a total of 8 landmines, 7 of which detonated, but no group has claimed responsibility as well. After this happened, Enrique Alfaro, the governor of Jalisco, basically said that all searches for clandestine graves are
stopped.
stopped.
And also, I mean, the fear of it now is like people are not going to go look for clandestine graves worrying about landmines now.
Absolutely. So, in a way, this story serves to reinforce different narratives in Mexico. One, that, the police are targeted. And the second one is someone out there doesn't want bodies to be found. And it almost proved that this was a perfect case to stop the search for clandestine graves. Enrique Alfaro basically said these graves the searches are paused in tandem with the police. So Madres Buscadoras continue going on the searches, but now they're a little bit more exposed. Now they don't rely on the protection, basically, of authorities in some cases. So he said they're stopped until we find a better route.
What do we know about the explosive devices themselves?
Mm-hmm. They say that they're landmines.
Pressure activated explosives in the ground, basically.
Correct. They were buried into the ground. We don't know where they could have emanated from. Again, we see remnants of this in Michoacan, where there's an active conflict between two rival cartels. Some farmers have reported also the landmines planted by Jalisco cartel. We were speculating that this is also a Jalisco cartel attack.
Yeah.
But in terms of the official lines investigations, we don't know much.
This is very nearby where one of the largest basically testing grounds where explosives was found probably like 6 years ago. Like drone explosives were tested there. Basically, they just found a testing ground for a lot of explosives. Mexico doesn't have a lot of spent or ordnance lying around all over the place like some war zones out there in the world. But mining explosives like Cemex explosives are pretty common out there. The response to this by the police, as somebody that's been trained in anti-terrorism stuff, you see them respond to this explosive related incident. All of them are carrying around their radios. All of them are walking around this place and they're not really prepared for this.
The protocols are just simply not there.
It's a new threat and there's just no education around this. And traditionally, who responds to explosive devices? The army.
Right.
Did the army appear, or was the army involved in any sort of detonation or disarmament of this? We really don't know.
Yeah. And there's a similar case that happened also in Celaya in Guanajuato just a few weeks before. Very similar MO, basically. Police were lured on an anonymous tip that a body had been found in a vehicle. Police approach it and the vehicle explodes. There was an IED, a car bomb, basically inside the vehicle. Again, no protocols for how to address it. No protocols for basically enclosing the area. When you see the videos of the attack or the videos of the aftermath, spectators are there, the media is there. Again, this is something that we don't have experience with.
Can you speculate with me a little bit about, why would you target responding police officers or the police in these areas? Why would you target them? On my end, just being a mindset, being a cop or a police officer out there, it would make me afraid and or hesitant to respond to anything without the security to respond to it. So basically, response times would be longer or non,
or limited,
or we just not go.
Absolutely, it reinforces the idea that we are fighting. That we're in an active conflict, and repeated forms of either antagonizing or making the authorities fear against you is
if somebody wanted to make a case for these organized crime elements engaging in acts of domestic terrorism, there's no clear thing here. They're not only limiting the response of authorities in that area, but they're also trying to cut the civilian populace as far as them trying to search for their missing relatives through terror, through terrorist tactics. Mexico has a lot of improvised explosives in its recent history that are very reminiscent to stuff in the Middle East, and a lot of people want to make those connections. But in my opinion, and some of the stuff that I've seen, a lot of this stuff looks like online source things, like people working out some of these explosives through training manuals or through other forms of. And I mean, Mexico is the cradle of some of the drone technology actually being utilized in modern conflicts. So it makes sense that some of these things are now, they're changing their ways, they're changing their tactics. In the past, an armed group would go up and shoot you, and now they're using improvised explosives.
Yeah. When it comes to the drone, new tech, basically, they found in Puebla, they found basically an explosive drone construction site where they were testing new materials. They were testing basically carrying capabilities, how much the drone could carry and still stabilize. Shuttercocks, they started adding to their explosives. So we are seeing them, taking techniques from other things that we've seen in videos from the Middle East or from South America, but it's also
Ukraine. The Ukrainian conflict has given so much to so many people who are paying attention as far as sophistication and new technologies being utilized. 3D printed mechanisms to release or to engage or actuate stuff in the air with a drone. And all these are coming here.
Absolutely. And a few months ago, we also covered the carjacking of some drone cargo. Over 300 drones just disappeared. And where they will end up, if we're going to see them in new videos, we don't know yet. But we definitely have the experience, or we have the evidence that suggests that it will.
And the authorities' response is more patrols with armed people in the back of trucks. Exactly how it was in 2004.
Absolutely.
Basically no adaptation, no innovation as far as activities, and the evolution is always going to be in the dark, apparently.
Yes, absolutely. After major incidents, with President Andrés Manuel López Obrador basically said that we wanted to leave the past behind and readapt to our new security threats. But, as we see in Michoacán, as we see in Guanajuato, anytime that there's an incident, just load up a lot of soldiers on a car, on a truck, bring them in, and very little has changed.
As far as technology and sophistication, this landmine attack to me is an indication of a new form of intimidation in a lot of ways, like to limit responses and also to get the civilians out of the fight. And it's scary.
Absolutely.
It's a scary time.
Absolutely. Several civilians were injured in this attack, so that definitely reinforces that.
Don't go out there to look for anything.
Yes.
Ayotzinapa, the specter that keeps popping up over and over again.
Yes.
43 students disappearing in
Iguala.
Guerrero, and it's been something that has haunted the federal government since the past administration all the way to now. Several lines and theories of involvement of the military in this disappearance, the forced disappearance of these kids, the army, federal police, politicians, and this giant conspiracy around the disappearance of these 43 males. What has come to light recently now about this case?
Yes, so like you mentioned, it's something that continues following us since 2014 when the disappearance essentially happened. Since then, we've heard that, the military, Iguala mayor, municipal police, and the Guerreros Unidos, which is the cartel organization in Guerrero, were involved. Up until now, we can't definitively prove what happened.
Yeah.
Up until this weekend, at least, when the New York Times released a report saying that 23,000 text messages from these members, from the Iguala mayor, from the municipal police, from the military, have surfaced from the DEA, from U.S. authorities. That essentially proves that they all colluded, that once the disappearance occurred, that the municipal police passed these students over to the Guerreros Unidos, who then killed them and disposed of him. It essentially implicates the entire city of Iguala in the disappearance. It's something that the current government refuses also to talk about. When President Andrés Manuel López Obrador basically assumed the position of presidency, he said, this is a case that we're going to be able to close because I will open up all lines of investigation. Since then, we have seen very little.
The military aspect of it, that the military was involved. Can you talk a little bit about that specific aspect?
Yes.
Because I think the reason why people are hesitant at the federal level to talk about it is because the army, the Mexican army and the Mexican military is basically behind power here. So that doesn't serve them here.
Absolutely. So what these text messages essentially revealed is that the military had knowledge of when it happened. They were not, the messages don't necessarily implicate them directly, but they do implicate them in knowing that
they knew about it, they didn't do anything.
Exactly, that they basically were receiving play-by-play. So the military basically has access to Pegasus. It's basically a government purchase-only decryption device that could basically penetrate through any sort of telephone communications. It's a wiretap on steroids. They have access, the military has access to it, and it is known that they basically had... They listened to all these conversations and saw these things as well, and they didn't do anything. They basically had a play-by-play of, we have these students, what do we do with them? Then calls are basically given to dispose of them. These text messages basically say that the military knew from the get-go and just failed to intervene. We also know that so one of the other lines of investigation that we never could confirm about the students is why they were kidnapped. Yeah. You know, there were several rumors about that they were implicated in some trafficking organization, that they had ties to rival. What we know of the Guerreros Unidos at that time is that they were basically fighting on different fronts. The organization itself was collapsing because of a lot of internal strife, but also a lot of incursion by rival organizations. During this time, the Guerreros Unidos were essentially paranoid. They had received communications that there was a rival organization coming in to basically take the plaza from them. The fact that these students were found on multiple buses, you know, basically the able-bodied individuals that a lot of cartel members use, they hijacked these vehicles, basically assumed that they were rival members, and killed and disposed of their bodies.
What did we learn in those text messages about the body disposal? Because I think that was there were massive searches for these bodies in the area. They were international forensic people brought in to try and analyze burnt remains and stuff like that. Nobody could figure out what happened to these bodies. None of them really provided any sort of clear insight with their investigations.
Exactly.
What did these texts reveal?
It implicated the coroner, the city's coroner, who basically had access to a giant crematorium. You know, this is basically the person who runs the morgues in this city. He was directly implicated in taking all of these bodies and essentially disposing of them. Incinerating.
When you talk about crematoriums, that'll get rid of everything except maybe some titanium implants. It's a perfect crime.
Perfect crime.
Except that they texted about it.
Absolutely.
The implications of this, as far as, you know, the military knew about some of these things. They weren't participant directly in it, but they knew about it. This investigation has been in the public eye since 2014. And they didn't say anything.
Yes, and we've seen some remnants of the military coming in. So the Guacamaya hacks, the Sedena leaks basically implicated the military in having stifled a lot of the family members looking for their missing relatives. There were some documents basically that revealed that they treated the relatives and family members as antagonistic groups, as the hostile kind of actors, making every effort to either implicate them in other crimes or to basically say that they were involved in some scheme here and other. So this is what we had known about the military before. They wanted this case to basically die down. Yeah. Now we have this definitive proof, or near definitive proof at least, that from the first instance, they knew what was happening. We've also had several international investigation groups come to Mexico in the hopes of determining exactly what happened. Time and time again, these investigation groups have said that the military has stifled their investigation, have basically provided zero evidence or zero support in these investigations. So, again, this is also something that points to our current government's political will to want to rectify some of what we've seen before. Yeah. And the political will from this current government seems to also be okay with what's happening.
I think what I see, and this is my opinion about it, we see a military in Mexico that is growing in power and in control. Mm-hmm. All airspace in Mexico is now militarized.
Yes.
They have construction deals for airports and train tracks, and so we're seeing a solidification of power with the military, and this is not good for their
image.
So
Absolutely.
It makes sense.
Sure. And this is just an individual from the Guerreros Unidos who was arrested, one of the leaders. So, we've also had several arrests here and there come related to these cases. Some even from military, former soldiers who have also been released because the forms of interrogations they say were illegal.
Yeah, lack of they're all being let go for lack of evidence and for lack of procedure to go through these interrogations, because these are usually done by members of the military, which are not absolutely prepared and or trained for any of this. Mm-hmm. And no bodies.
No bodies.
Perfect crime.
Yeah, this is the Iguala mayor and his wife who've since been arrested for different crimes, but proven ties to the Guerreros Unidos and other criminal organizations, essentially. And again, this points to a story that we all know. Members of the political families and politicians completely working in tandem, hand to hand with other criminal organizations in Mexico.
The cartels are very much politicized and in politics.
Yes.
There is no clear line.
Mm-hmm.